If you had asked me that Tuesday morning what was the likeliest way to get Nero Wolfe downstairs from the plant rooms before 11, I would have put my money on a fire in the kitchen or a personal visit from the president. I would have been wrong, which proves that even a man in my line of work can be surprised when someone walks through our front door carrying a copper pot and an attitude. The pot came first. It was a serious piece of equipment, the kind that takes 2 hands and a strong back, bright as a new penny and heavy enough to anchor a small yacht. The woman carrying it managed both the pot and a manila folder without breaking stride, which told me she was either very strong or very determined. Possibly both. She was 30-something, with dark hair pulled back in a way that meant business, wearing a gray suit that had seen better days, but still had its dignity. Her face was the kind that wouldn't tell you what she was thinking until she decided you'd earned the privilege. "Good morning," I said, taking the pot because it looked like it might dent our Persian rug. "If you're here to sell cookware, you've come to the wrong address. We're fully equipped." "I'm not selling anything," she said, her voice carrying the kind of education that doesn't need to advertise itself. "I'm Celia Voss. I need to rent your kitchen. I've heard a lot of unusual requests in my time working for Nero Wolfe, but this one was new." "You want to rent whose kitchen?" "Mr. Wolfe's." She glanced around the office, taking in the globe, the safe, the orchid photographs on the walls. "This is the right address, isn't it?" "The address is right," I said, setting the pot on the stand by the wall safe where we keep things that don't belong anywhere else. "But the idea isn't. Our kitchen is not available for rental under any circumstances short of the second coming. What exactly did you have in mind?" Her grip tightened on the folder. "It's for a demonstration. I need to prove that a specific sauce requires constant attention for exactly 48 minutes. It's the only way to establish an alibi." Now that was interesting. People throw the word alibi around a lot in my business, usually when they're trying to explain why they couldn't possibly have been where someone says they were. But this was the first time anyone had wanted to create one in our kitchen. An alibi for what? For my fiancé. Julian Craig. He's been accused of embezzling funds from the Duquette Foundation, where we both work. They say he altered computer records and forged emails at 9:18 last Tuesday evening. But he couldn't have. He was at my apartment, helping me prepare a Duquette reduction sauce. The recipe requires constant stirring and temperature adjustments. There's no way he could have left the stove for the 6 minutes it would have taken to do what they're accusing him of. I leaned back against my desk. The Duquette Foundation. That rang a bell. Something about culinary education and preserving historical recipes. "And you need our kitchen because my apartment stove runs hot and the thermostat is unreliable. I tried to recreate the timing yesterday, but the conditions weren't exact. I need a kitchen with precise temperature control." She opened the folder and pulled out several typed pages. "I have the original recipe here, with timing notations. If I can demonstrate it under proper conditions, I can prove Julian's innocence." It was an interesting problem, I had to admit. But I also knew that Nero Wolfe would rather lend out his toothbrush than his kitchen. "Miss Voss, I appreciate your situation, but Mr. Wolfe's kitchen is not a laboratory for hire. It's more like a temple, and Fritz Brenner is the high priest. Even I need permission to make a sandwich." "I can pay whatever he asks," she said quickly. "This isn't just about Julian. It's about the Foundation's reputation. If he's expelled with cause, it will destroy everything we've worked for." Before I could explain why that wouldn't matter, Fritz himself appeared in the doorway, drawn by some sixth sense that detected the presence of unauthorized cookware. He looked at the copper pot like it had personally insulted his ancestors. "What," he said in his careful English touched with Swiss precision, "is that doing in here?" "Miss Voss brought it," I said. "She wants to rent the kitchen to prove an alibi." Fritz's eyebrows rose approximately 1 millimeter, which for him was equivalent to falling down in shock. "We do not rent the kitchen." "I know the Duquette reduction," she said to him, as if she were announcing she knew the location of the Holy Grail. The 5-movement version from the 1949 notes. I need the exactness of your equipment." Fritz paused. I could see him wrestling with professional curiosity and territorial instinct. "You have studied Duquette." "I manage the Foundation's archives. We preserve his work, train new chefs in his methods." She met his gaze steadily. "That's why this matters so much. If Julian is discredited, it reflects on everything we're trying to protect." I checked the clock. It was 9:45, which meant Wolfe would be descending from the orchid rooms in an hour and 15 minutes. Under normal circumstances, I would have sent Miss Voss away with our regrets and a suggestion to try the Culinary Institute, but something about her story nagged at me. Maybe it was the precision of her request, or the way she handled that heavy pot like it was made of spun glass. Or maybe it was just that Tuesday mornings are usually too quiet for their own good. "Wait here," I said. "Let me see if I can get Mr." Wolfe's attention. I found him in the kitchen, standing at the center island while Fritz arranged ingredients for what looked like a complex sauce preparation. He was wearing his yellow shirt and brown suit, which meant he was in a relatively good mood despite the early interruption to his routine. "Archie," he said without looking up, from a bowl of what appeared to be minced shallots. "I trust you disposed of our visitor with appropriate courtesy. Actually, I think you'll want to meet her. Celia Voss from the Duquette Foundation. Someone's accused her fiancé of embezzlement, and she wants to use our kitchen to prove his alibi by demonstrating a historical sauce recipe." Wolfe's head came up slowly. His eyes, usually half closed in the morning, opened wider. "The Duquette Foundation? You know it." "I know Duquette's work. His reduction sauces were masterpieces of precision." He glanced at Fritz, who nodded approvingly. "What is the nature of the accusation?" "Computer fraud, forged emails. She says he was stirring sauce at the exact time the crime supposedly occurred, and the recipe requires constant attention." Wolfe considered this, absently adjusting the position of a wooden spoon. "And she wishes to use our kitchen because her apartment stove is unreliable. She needs precise temperature control to prove the timing." For a long moment, Wolfe said nothing. Then he turned to Fritz. "The Duquette reduction. Which version?" I hurried back to the office. "Miss Voss, which version of the Duquette reduction are we talking about?" "The 5-movement based on the 1949 notes, not the simplified version from later publications." I relayed this to Wolfe, who made a small sound of interest. "Bring her to the office," he said finally. "And Archie, tell Fritz to prepare coffee for 3. This may take some time." When I returned to escort Miss Voss to meet Nero Wolfe, I reflected that Tuesday mornings might be more interesting than I'd given them credit for. She gathered her folder and followed me, leaving the copper pot behind like a promise or a threat. "One thing," I said as we walked toward the office. "Mr. Wolfe doesn't like to be rushed, and he definitely doesn't like to have his kitchen treated like a rental property. Be prepared for some resistance." "I understand," she said. "But Mr. Goodwin, if I can't prove Julian's innocence, they'll destroy him. And if they can do it to him, they can do it to anyone at the Foundation. This isn't just about one man's reputation, it's about protecting an institution." As we entered the office and I heard Wolfe's elevator descending from the plant rooms, I had the distinct feeling that Miss Celia Voss was about to discover whether Nero Wolfe's legendary intellect extended to matters of the heart as well as the mind. The game, as they say, was about to begin. Nero Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at precisely 11 o'clock, moving with the deliberate care of a man who weighs 1/7 of a ton and treats each step as a calculated decision. He entered the office like a force of nature contained in a yellow shirt and brown suit, settling behind his desk with the gravitational certainty of a planet finding its orbit. His eyes, half closed against the morning light, fixed on Celia Voss with the steady attention of a man accustomed to extracting truth from the most reluctant witnesses. Fritz appeared with coffee for the lady and me, and beer for Wolfe, executing the morning ritual with Swiss precision despite the presence of an unauthorized copper pot and a stranger seeking kitchen privileges. The normalcy of the routine seemed to calm Miss Voss, though her grip on the manila folder remained white-knuckled. "Miss Voss," Wolfe said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "Archie tells me you wish to borrow my kitchen to establish an alibi. An extraordinary request, though not without precedent in the annals of human desperation." She straightened in the red leather chair, meeting his gaze with the determination of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "Mistress Wolfe, my fiancé Julian Craig stands accused of embezzling funds from the Duquette Foundation through computer fraud. The alleged crime occurred last Tuesday at 9:18 p.m. At that precise moment, Julian was in my apartment kitchen, helping me prepare a Duquette reduction sauce, the 5-movement version from the 1949 notes. The recipe demands continuous, precise attention for 48 minutes. He could not have been manipulating computer records while stirring that sauce. Wolfe opened his beer with the concentration of a chemist measuring reagents. The Duquette Foundation. I'm familiar with their work preserving culinary history. The 5-movement reduction is indeed a masterpiece of precision. He glanced toward the kitchen where I could hear Fritz moving about with his usual efficiency. Each movement requires specific temperature ranges and stirring patterns. A deviation of 30 seconds in the critical phases will cause the emulsion to fail. "Exactly," she said, leaning forward slightly. "That's why I need to demonstrate it under controlled conditions. My apartment stove runs hot and the thermostat is unreliable. I've tried twice to recreate the timing, but I can't get consistent results. The Foundation's board includes professional chefs. They'll understand the technical requirements if I can prove the impossibility of leaving the preparation." "And the nature of the accusation?" Wolfe inquired, rotating his beer glass with methodical precision. $231,000 transferred to a shell company called Heritage Bay Culinary, which doesn't exist. 3 transfers over 6 weeks, with the final one occurring at 9:18 p.m. last Tuesday. The digital evidence shows Julian's credentials, authorizing forged invoices and approving the transfers. Her voice carried the bitter taste of repeated explanations. "But Julian's phone was in my apron pocket that entire evening. He asked me to hold it because his sleeve kept brushing the counter. You can't access the Foundation system without 2-factor authentication from that phone." I made a note of that detail. It was the kind of specific, seemingly insignificant fact that often proved crucial. "Miss Voss, who else at the Foundation has administrative access to make such transfers?" She consulted her folder. "Gabriel Varelli, the executive director. Marjorie Lentz, our chief operating officer. Anton Rees, our chef-in-residence. And myself, though my access is limited to archival materials." Wolfe's eyebrows rose fractionally. "And who discovered this alleged embezzlement?" Marjorie found the discrepancy during a routine audit. She called an emergency board meeting with Gabriel and Conrad Larrabee, our board chair. Suddenly, everyone was looking at Julian like he'd grown fangs. "Mr. Craig's position at the Foundation?" "Program manager for community grants, but he also handles digitization of historical recipes when I'm overloaded. He was being considered for promotion to assistant director." She paused, her jaw tightening. "Julian has been vocal about certain financial decisions. He believes some resources are being misdirected from preservation to what he calls vanity projects." Before Wolfe could respond, the doorbell rang with the urgency of a fire alarm. I went to investigate and found myself face to face with a tall, angular man in a pristine white chef's jacket, carrying a knife roll like a sacred relic. Behind him stood a woman in a navy suit, briefcase in hand and legal authority radiating from every pore. "Where is she?" the chef demanded, pushing past me without invitation. "Don't tell me," I said. "You're here to rent the kitchen too." The woman handed me a business card. "Alma Quince, counsel to the Duquette Foundation. We need to speak with Miss..." Voss immediately regarding potential misappropriation of materials and the ongoing investigation. The chef, who could only be Anton Rees, spotted the copper pot and pointed at it with theatrical outrage. "That belongs to the Foundation. You have no right to remove it without proper documentation." "Actually, it's mine," Celia said, standing as they entered the office. "On loan to the Foundation for 2 years, with your signature on the intake form, Chef." Rees flushed crimson. "And you are endangering the Foundation by dragging this sordid affair into—" He gestured around the office with obvious distaste. "A detective's parlor." Wolfe, who had observed this intrusion with the patience of a mountain weathering a brief storm, finally spoke. "Mr. Rees, Miss Quince, you have entered my house with considerable presumption. You will sit, and you will cease pointing at my furniture." Something in his tone, perhaps the quiet certainty that suggested resistance would be both futile and unpleasant, caused both visitors to find chairs with remarkable alacrity. "Miss Quince," Wolfe continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you will answer 2 questions. First, when were the Duquette notebooks last comprehensively inventoried? Second, who controls the account that received the allegedly stolen funds?" Quince's mouth tightened. "The notebooks were inventoried last quarter. The receiving account is being traced through appropriate channels. We expect to identify the controlling parties shortly." "Puis," Wolfe said, soft as a sigh. "You will not identify them because you hope not to, lest it prove inconvenient." He closed his eyes briefly, then fixed his gaze on Rees. "As for you, Chef Rees, it is an offense to threaten my property with your finger. Should I ever detect your unauthorized presence in my kitchen, you will depart via my sidewalk on your knees." Rees started to rise, then thought better of it. "You cannot—" "Enough," Quince interrupted, standing. "Miss Voss, your employment contract requires cooperation with internal investigations. I strongly recommend you return with us immediately." Celia's knuckles whitened on her folder. "Alma, if you want to charge me, charge me. If you want to fire me, fire me. But I will not watch you sacrifice Julian to make your board meetings run more smoothly." The silence stretched like a wire under tension. Finally, Quince gathered her briefcase. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Wolfe. This matter is far from concluded." As they reached the door, Rees turned back with a parting shot. "You are not qualified to steward Duquette's legacy, Miss Voss. You confuse sentiment with skill. It requires both." She replied quietly, and that was that. After I showed them out, I returned to find Wolfe contemplating the door as if it were an exhibit in a museum he disapproved of. "People," he observed, "are intolerable." "Most," I agreed. "Do we take the case?" He turned to Celia, who was still standing, her face pale but determined. "Miss Voss, you wish me to vindicate Mr. Craig and preserve your institution from those who would gut it for convenience." She nodded. "I do not rent my kitchen," he said deliberately. "However, I will consider a demonstration if it illuminates questions I pose, and only under Fritz's supervision." "You will not touch a control without his consent." Relief flooded her features. "Yes, of course." "You will pay me a retainer," Wolfe continued, naming a sum that made even me blink. She didn't hesitate, writing the check with steady hands. Wolfe tucked it into his desk drawer and turned to me. "Archie, you will visit the Duquette Foundation. Speak with Mr. Varelli, Miss Lentz, and anyone else who requires enduring. Bring me personnel files, access logs, board meeting minutes, and a complete inventory of recent loans. If they resist, remind them of Miss Quince's wisdom in avoiding publicity. And if they still resist, then call Saul Panzer. Some shadows require professional attention." As I collected my hat in the copper pot, I wasn't leaving it for Rees to reclaim, Fritz appeared in the doorway. He glanced at the gleaming copper and nodded approvingly, a priest recognizing a worthy vessel. "Careful, Archie," he said quietly. "Always am," I replied, which is sometimes even true. The game, as they say, was officially afoot. And if the morning's visitors were any indication, it was going to be a game with very sharp knives. The Duquette Foundation occupied 3 floors of a converted warehouse in the village, the kind of building that had been gentrified just enough to command serious rent without losing its industrial bones. I found a legal parking spot 3 blocks away, which in Manhattan qualifies as a minor miracle, and left the copper pot wrapped in a moving blanket in the back seat. The morning's visitors had shown their teeth, and I didn't need Chef Reese staging a rescue mission while I was conducting interviews. The lobby struck the right balance between respectability and purpose. Terrazzo floors that had seen decades of foot traffic, glass cases displaying historical menus and photographs of stern-faced chefs, and the faint, pleasant aroma of spices drifting down from the test kitchens above. The receptionist wore the kind of practiced smile that comes from customer service training, but her eyes sharpened when I handed her my card. "Archie Goodwin to see Gabriel Varelli," I said. "He's expecting me." She consulted her screen with the efficiency of someone who had fielded more unusual requests than mine. "3rd floor, corner office. The elevator is just behind you." Gabriel Varelli's office could have doubled as a museum exhibit on how to look important without trying too hard. The walls displayed framed certificates, photographs of himself with minor celebrities, and a collection of antique cooking implements that probably hadn't seen actual food in decades. Varelli himself was a compact man in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of tan that comes from regular vacations rather than honest work. His handshake was firm but brief, the grip of a man who had learned to measure his enthusiasm. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, gesturing to a chair that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Thank you for coming. This is, as you can imagine, a most distressing situation." "I can imagine," I said, settling in and opening my notebook. "Miss Voss tells us Mr. Craig was being considered for assistant director." Varelli's expression grew pained, like a man contemplating a fine wine that had turned to vinegar. "Julian was a valued member of our team, talented, dedicated, passionate about our mission. This betrayal is inexplicable." He picked up a paperweight shaped like a miniature copper pot and turned it over in his hands. To think he would steal from the very institution he claimed to love. Miss Voss mentioned Mr. Craig had concerns about certain financial decisions. Something about vanity projects versus preservation work. The paperweight stopped rotating. "Julian has always been passionate about resource allocation. He holds strong opinions, sometimes inflexible ones. We are a foundation, Mr. Goodwin, not a charity. We must balance preservation with growth, tradition with innovation." His voice carried the weariness of someone who had made this argument before. "Sometimes that involves projects that may seem less directly tied to the archives, but are crucial for our long-term viability. Such as our new digital culinary history platform, for instance, a massive undertaking requiring significant investment in technology and personnel, or the acquisition of specialized equipment for historical demonstrations." He set down the paperweight with deliberate care. Julian questioned the timing and scale of such initiatives. He felt we should prioritize more immediate community programs. "And who else shares your level of access to authorize transfers?" "Marjorie Lentz, our COO, and myself. Historically, the board chair has access as well, though Conrad rarely uses it directly." He frowned. "Our system has multiple layers of approval, including 2-factor authentication. That's what makes this so perplexing. Julian's phone was definitely used to authorize the transfers." Before I could pursue that interesting detail, a woman appeared in the doorway. Marjorie Lentz was the kind of person who made efficiency look effortless. medium height, grey hair and a practical cut, and eyes that catalogued everything they saw. She wore a dark blue dress that suggested competence without calling attention to itself. "Gabriel, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to discuss the Pemberton grant application." She glanced at me with polite curiosity that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't believe we've met." Archie Goodwin, representing Celia Voss. I stood and offered my hand, which she shook with the grip of someone who had worked for her living. "I was hoping to speak with you about the financial discrepancies you discovered." Her expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I discovered the irregularities during a routine quarterly audit. 3 unauthorized transfers totaling over $200,000 to Heritage Bay Culinary, which proved to be a non-existent shell company." Her voice carried the precision of someone who had repeated these facts multiple times. The digital trail led directly to Julian's credentials, his access codes, his 2-factor authentication, everything properly logged. According to Miss Voss, Julian's phone was in her possession that entire evening. People can be mistaken about details, especially when they're emotionally involved. She consulted her watch with the gesture of someone whose time was carefully allocated. "The system logs don't lie, Mr. Goodwin Julian's device authenticated the final transfer at 9:18 p.m. Gabriel cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should continue this in Marjorie's office, where she has access to the relevant files." Marjorie's office was smaller than Gabriel's, but far more organized, every pen aligned, every document filed with military precision. She settled behind her desk like a general reviewing battle plans. "Mr. Goodwin, let me be clear," she said without preamble. "This foundation has zero tolerance for financial impropriety. The evidence against Mr. Craig is overwhelming and irrefutable." "Did you have any personal disagreements with Mr. Craig?" She blinked slowly, a deliberate movement. "Mr. Craig and I had professional differences. He was often vocal about his opinions regarding the Foundation's strategic direction. He opposed the digital culinary history platform which I developed and oversee. He even suggested it was a money pit designed to inflate resumes, which I found unprofessional." "Who has access to Julian's office?" "All senior staff have master keys for emergency purposes. Gabriel, myself, Anton, and Celia. Though access is logged electronically when using key cards, manual key access isn't tracked." She opened a file folder with practiced efficiency. "The logs show no unauthorized entries using electronic access." "I'd like to speak with someone about your IT systems," I said, "the technical details of how these transfers were authenticated." Gabriel consulted his phone. "Nora Pell handles our systems. She's exacting." Nora Pell's domain was a long room with raised floors and the steady hum of climate control. She wore a black t-shirt and had a coffee mug that proclaimed, "Patch Tuesday is every day." Her handshake was brief because her other hand remained on her mouse, and she looked me over with the assessment of someone deciding whether I was a problem or a project. "You want to know about our authentication system," she said without preamble. "Among other things. How exactly would someone use Julian's credentials without his physical device?" She leaned back in her chair, fingers still dancing across her keyboard. "We use a cloud suite with hardware keys for admins and app-based second factor for the next tier. Approvals happen through an internal portal that logs device, IP, and timestamp. If someone used Julian's credentials without his phone, they'd need either his physical device or access to backup codes." "There are backup codes?" "2 fallback systems," she said, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Time-based backup codes for emergencies, issued by me in sealed envelopes and stored with Marjorie. And a biometric workstation in the finance office that can approve invoices if the mobile device is unavailable. But that requires 2 people present, the staffer and a manager." "Who has access to the backup codes?" "Only Marjorie signs them out. There hasn't been one issued in the last quarter." She tapped her screen. But here's something interesting. 2 days before the final transfer, there was an admin session from Marjorie's office at 6:03 p.m., using her account to temporarily elevate Julian's role. It was rolled back 20 minutes later. Routine? Not usual. He didn't need that elevation for his regular duties, and the change originated from the finance workstation, the one that requires biometric authentication plus 2 people present. Who else was in the building? According to the logs, Gabriel was there. The system shows both Marjorie and Gabriel present when the role change occurred. She scrolled through more data. Also interesting, at 9:12 p.m. on Tuesday, there were 3 failed login attempts from a device registered to Anton Reese. He was trying to access the grant's portal, which isn't his area. Failed attempts just before Julian's successful authentication? 6 minutes before, then Julian's legitimate device approved the transfer at 9:18. She printed out a report while I watched. One more thing, Julian replaced his phone 2 months ago. New device registration, backup codes reissued and destroyed per protocol. No camera record of that day because our CCTV was offline for upgrades. I studied the printout, noting the precise time stamps and device identifications. Could a second device be registered temporarily and removed without leaving traces? Nora's smile was sharp as a blade. Not without someone with my level of access helping. And I don't help people steal from my employers. Before leaving, I managed a brief conversation with Conrad Larrabee, the Foundation's board chair. He occupied a corner office on the 2nd floor, surrounded by awards and photographs of himself with various dignitaries. He was more concerned with damage control than truth-finding. "This is a regrettable incident, Mr. Goodwin," he said in a voice like a gavel striking wood. "The Foundation's reputation is paramount. We cannot afford any hint of scandal. Mr. Craig's actions are a blight that must be excised swiftly, even if he's innocent." Larrabee waved a dismissive hand. "The evidence is clear. The board is unanimous. We need to present a united front and put this behind us." As I waited for Marjorie to compile the requested documents, I took a walk through the 2nd-floor test kitchens. They were state-of-the-art facilities that would have made Fritz weep with joy, gleaming stainless steel and copper with precise temperature controls on every surface. Anton Reese was in one of the kitchens, directing 2 junior chefs with the intensity of a conductor leading a difficult symphony. He caught sight of me and his face darkened, but he turned away without comment. In a corner cubicle, I noticed a framed photograph showing Julian Craig, Celia Voss, and another woman, all smiling with their arms around each other at what looked like a Foundation event. The other woman seemed familiar, but I couldn't place her immediately. With a stack of folders under my arm, I finally escaped the Foundation's carefully controlled atmosphere. The afternoon traffic was thick, but my mind was busier. Gabriel Virelli, the weary administrator, worried about image and innovation. Marjorie Lentz, the code professional obsessed with procedure and suspicious of anyone who questioned her projects. Nora Pell, the competent IT specialist who had provided crucial technical details. And Anton Reese, the volatile chef with his own access issues and obvious grudges. The technical picture was becoming clearer, even if the human motivations remained murky. Someone had elevated Julian's role 2 days before the final transfer, using a system that required 2 people. Someone had tried to access the wrong portal minutes before Julian's credentials were used successfully. And someone had created a window of opportunity when backup codes were reissued and security cameras were conveniently offline. Back at the brownstone, I found Wolfe in his office with a book open on his chest, eyes closed in what might have been sleep or contemplation. The familiar scents of orchids and Fritz's dinner preparations provided a comforting contrast to the Foundation's sterile efficiency. "Archie," he said without opening his eyes, "I trust your expedition was enlightening." "More than enough to chew on," I said, settling into my chair. "Everyone has motives, access, and opportunity. The technical details are particularly interesting. Backup codes, role elevations, failed login attempts, and convenient security gaps. Wolfe stirred, opening his eyes to fix me with his steady gaze. Excellent. Fritz is preparing for Miss Voss's demonstration at 3 o'clock. I find myself curious about the precise timing of Duquette's 5-movement reduction. He reached for his beer with deliberate care. But first, you will provide a complete report. Slowly, with all necessary detail. We have a mystery to solve and an alibi to test. As I began my account, the copper pot still sat by the wall safe, gleaming like a promise. The brownstone had been disturbed, information had been gathered, and the game was truly beginning to take shape. Whether Celia Voss's demonstration would prove Julian's innocence or reveal something else entirely remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. We now had enough threads to begin weaving them into a pattern. The question was whether that pattern would spell salvation or something far more complicated. At precisely 3 o'clock, Fritz had transformed the kitchen into a temple of culinary precision. Every surface gleamed with the devotion of a man who treated cooking as both art and science. The copper pot sat centered on the front burner like an altarpiece, its surface reflecting the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Thermometers were clipped at strategic positions, a bain-marie waited at perfect temperature, and ingredients had been portioned with the exactitude of a pharmacist measuring medicine. Celia Voss arrived carrying a leather satchel that bore the scars of serious kitchen work. She moved with the focused determination of someone who understood that the next 48 minutes would determine not just her fiancé's fate, but the integrity of everything she held dear. Fritz met her at the kitchen doorway with a slight bow, the acknowledgement of one professional to another. Wolfe positioned himself at the kitchen's central island where he could observe without interfering, his bulk settling into watchful stillness. His presence filled the space with the gravity of a judge preparing to render verdict, though his expression remained as placid as a mountain lake. The demonstration begins. "Mr. Wolfe," Celia said, unpacking her satchel with practiced efficiency, "I need you to understand exactly what this process demands. The Duquette 5-movement reduction requires 48 minutes of continuous, precise attention. The source will fail catastrophically if left unattended for more than 90 seconds at any critical juncture." "Proceed," Wolfe said simply, his eyes already cataloguing every detail. She began with the foundation, a careful blend of shallots, white wine, and cream that demanded constant stirring at exactly 185 degrees Fahrenheit. Her movements possessed the economy of someone who had performed this ritual countless times, each gesture refined through repetition into something approaching perfection. "Movement 1, she announced, adjusting the flame with microscopic precision. 8 minutes of continuous stirring while the alcohol reduces. The temperature cannot vary more than 5 degrees, and the stirring pattern must remain constant to prevent the cream from breaking." I positioned myself with my stopwatch where I could observe both her hands and the kitchen clock. Fritz stationed himself by the stove with a thermometer, his face wearing the profound calm of a man witnessing proper worship of his craft. "On Tuesday evening," Celia continued without breaking her rhythm, "Julian and I began at exactly 8:36. He had chopped the aromatics beautifully, though not with Fritz's precision, and we started the heat precisely on schedule." The kitchen filled with the developing fragrance of the reduction, a complex aroma that seemed to awaken something primal in Wolfe's expression. His eyelids lowered slightly, which from him constituted visible emotion. "Movement 2, she announced at the 8-minute mark, adding stock with her free hand while maintaining the stirring motion. 12 minutes at 185 degrees. This is the critical phase. If I stop stirring for more than 90 seconds, the emulsion breaks and cannot be recovered." Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She ignored it completely, her attention focused entirely on the developing source. When it buzzed again 2 minutes later, She didn't even glance toward the sound. "That's exactly what happened Tuesday night," she said without breaking rhythm. Julian's phone was in my apron pocket because his sleeve kept brushing the counter. When notifications came through, neither of us even looked up. The sauce demanded everything. Fritz nodded approvingly as he monitored the temperature. Perfect consistency. The emulsion is forming exactly as Duquette intended. Wolfe's observations. At the 20-minute mark, as Celia moved into movement 3 with the addition of herbs, Wolfe spoke for the first time since the demonstration began. "Miss Voss, you maintain that, mister." Craig could not have left this. Preparation for even the briefest interval? "Not without destroying everything we'd worked for," she replied, adjusting her stirring pattern to accommodate the new ingredients. Duquette's notes are explicit. The fool who wanders will return to find his hopes split. Yet, Wolfe observed, with the precision of a surgeon making an incision, if the ingredients were staged precisely and your partner possessed reliable technique, there might exist brief intervals, seconds rather than minutes, but intervals nonetheless. Her stirring never faltered, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Perhaps seconds, Mr. Wolfe, but not the minutes required to access a computer system, navigate to financial records, and authorize transfers." "Movement 4, she announced at the 30-minute mark, beginning the delicate process of incorporating butter. 8 minutes of constant motion while the emulsion reaches final consistency. The temperature must hold at exactly 180 degrees. 1 degree higher and the butter breaks, 1 degree lower and it won't incorporate properly." Fritz stepped forward to assist with the butter additions, passing each piece with the timing of a Swiss chronometer. The kitchen fell into the focused silence of professionals executing a complex procedure. Julian Craig's arrival. As Celia moved into the final phase of the demonstration, I heard the front door open and Fritz's voice greeting someone in the hall. Moments later, Julian Craig appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face bearing the strain of a man who had spent sleepless nights contemplating ruin. He was mid-30s, fair-haired, with the earnest demeanor of someone who wrote thoughtful emails and meant every word. His clothes were rumpled but clean, suggesting he'd made an effort despite his circumstances. Most tellingly, his eyes went immediately to Celia and the copper pot, not to Wolfe or myself. "How is it progressing?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of everything that depended on the answer. "Movement 5, Celia announced without looking up. "Final reduction, 10 minutes of precise temperature control while the sauce reaches proper consistency." Julian moved to stand beside her, his presence somehow completing the picture. I could see how they worked together, his hands automatically reaching for a towel to wipe the counter, his shoulder angling to give her more room, the unconscious choreography of two people who had shared countless hours in kitchens. "On Tuesday," he said to Wolfe, "I stood exactly here." Celia had my phone because I kept bumping the counter with my sleeve. When it buzzed with notifications, I didn't even glance at it. The sauce required everything. At exactly 48 minutes, Celia lifted her spoon and let a ribbon of sauce flow back into the pot. It was perfection. Glossy, smooth, with the complex ivory color that marked a successful Duquette reduction. Fritz tasted it with the reverence of a priest sampling communion wine. "Magnificent," he pronounced. "Perfect technique, perfect timing, perfect result." Wolfe's verdict. Wolfe observed the completed sauce with the satisfaction of a mathematician confirming an elegant proof. "Miss Voss, your demonstration has been illuminating in ways you may not have anticipated. The technical requirements are indeed absolute. No person could have left that preparation for the time necessary to execute computer fraud without destroying the result." Celia's shoulders relaxed fractionally, though wariness remained in her eyes. "However," Wolfe continued, "this raises the more intriguing question of how Mr. Craig's credentials were used so convincingly at the precise moment he was stirring your sauce. Someone with considerable technical sophistication and intimate knowledge of the Foundation's systems executed this deception. Julian stepped forward, his jaw tight with controlled anger. Mr. Wolfe, I've been thinking about who had access to my phone that day. At lunch, Dana Marsh borrowed it to show me a video. She said her battery was dead. Dana Marsh, I said, the name triggering a memory. Development director? Yes. We dated briefly years ago, ended amicably. She's always been friendly, helpful. His voice carried the bitter realization of someone discovering that trust had been weaponized against him. Wolfe's eyebrows rose fractionally. Interesting. Archie, during your reconnaissance at the Foundation, did you encounter Miss Marsh? I saw her photograph in the cubicle area, Julian, Celia, and a brunette at what looked like a Foundation event. But I didn't speak with her directly. The larger pattern. Mr. Craig, Wolfe said, settling back in his chair. Tell me about the role elevation that occurred 2 days before the final transfer. Julian's expression grew troubled. Marjorie asked me to help with a vendor payment that Friday. Said there had been a system glitch. I went to her office, where she sat at the finance workstation with Gabriel standing behind her. She put her hand on the biometric reader and asked me to enter my password. Then they thanked me, and I left. A workstation that requires 2 people present, I added. According to Nora Pell, that elevation wasn't routine for Julian's role. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then fixed his gaze on Julian with the intensity of a searchlight. And Chef Reese attempted to access the grant's portal at 9:12 p.m. Tuesday, 6 minutes before your credentials allegedly authorized the transfer. Anton was furious with me, Julian admitted. I'd suggested bringing in outside chefs for the donor event. He saw it as a challenge to his authority. A pattern emerges, Wolfe murmured. Multiple individuals with access, motive, and opportunity. Yet someone orchestrated this deception with considerable sophistication, creating not just the technical means, but also the social engineering necessary to obtain your credentials and establish the timeline. Fritz appeared with coffee for our guests and beer for Wolfe, the familiar ritual providing a moment of normalcy in the midst of revelation. Archie, Wolfe said after sampling his beer, tomorrow you will locate Miss Marsh and invite her to join us. If she declines, appeal to her curiosity about the Foundation's future. If that fails, appeal to her concern about being implicated in a federal crime. He turned to Julian and Celia. You will both return to your normal routines, but you will inform me immediately of any contact from Foundation personnel, law enforcement, or anyone else connected to this matter. The demonstration has proven Mr. Craig's innocence of the specific charge, but it has also revealed that we face an adversary of considerable cunning. Setting the stage. As our guests prepared to leave, Wolfe offered a final observation. The creation of Heritage Bay Culinary as a shell company suggests someone with both financial sophistication and a sense of irony. Heritage Bay, a name that evokes preservation and tradition, yet serves as a vehicle for theft. Our adversary possesses not just technical skill, but also a twisted appreciation for symbolism. The copper pot sat cooling on Fritz's immaculate counter, its contents a masterpiece of culinary precision. But the real recipe, the one for the perfect frame-up, was just beginning to reveal its ingredients, and like Celia's sauce, it would require perfect timing and constant attention to prevent it from failing catastrophically. The demonstration had proven Julian's innocence, but it had also confirmed that we faced an opponent who understood not just computer systems and financial fraud, but also human nature and the art of misdirection. The game was entering a new phase, one that would require all of Wolfe's intellectual precision and my legwork to navigate successfully. The question was whether we could expose the truth before our adversary realized how much we had already discovered. In the world of Nero Wolfe, timing was everything, and the clock, as they say, was ticking. By Thursday morning, the rain had settled into the kind of steady drumming that makes New York feel like a city under siege. I found Wolfe in his office at 9:30, earlier than usual, with the morning paper folded beside an untouched cup of coffee. That meant he was either deeply absorbed in the case or profoundly irritated by something. Given recent events, probably both. "Archie," he said without looking up from a collection of Foundation documents spread across his desk, "I've been contemplating the psychology of embezzlement. It requires not merely opportunity and means, but a particular form of arrogance, the belief that one's cleverness exceeds institutional vigilance. And our embezzler displays sophistication that suggests not desperation, but calculation." He lifted a financial report and studied it through his reading glasses. The amounts transferred to Heritage Bay, culinary, 47,000, 89,000, and 95,000, appear random but total, precisely the budget allocated for Miss Lentz's digital platform project. Someone with intimate knowledge of Foundation finances constructed this theft. I poured coffee and settled into my chair. Speaking of intimate knowledge, I need to track down Dana Marsh. She's not in any public directory. Miss Marsh will prove illuminating, I suspect. Her relationship with Mr. Craig, her access to his device, her position in the Foundation's hierarchy, all suggest someone positioned to observe without being observed. It took the better part of an hour and several phone calls to locate Dana Marsh's address in Chelsea. I found her leaving her apartment building just before noon, dressed for what looked like a serious business lunch. She was an attractive woman in her late 30s, with dark hair and the kind of professional polish that comes from years of managing donors and their expectations. "Miss Marsh," I said, stepping into her path. "Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe. We need to discuss Julian Craig's situation." Her smile faltered slightly, replaced by wariness. "I'm not sure what there is to discuss. It's a Foundation matter, and I'm not authorized to speak about ongoing investigations. It's also a matter of federal fraud, Miss Marsh. And Mr. Wolfe has particular expertise in distinguishing between guilt and misdirection." I gestured toward a small cafe on the corner. 20 minutes of your time could save everyone considerable trouble." She glanced at her watch, then at me, calculating. 20 minutes, but I have a lunch appointment I can't miss. The interview. The cafe was the kind of place that catered to neighborhood professionals. Good coffee, quiet corners, and the sort of neutral atmosphere that encouraged confidential conversations. Dana chose a table by the window, positioning herself where she could watch the street while we talked. Julian and I were friends. She began without preamble, stirring her coffee with unnecessary precision. We dated briefly 3 years ago, but it ended amicably. We worked well together professionally. He had excellent instincts for identifying worthy grant recipients. "Tell me about borrowing his phone." "Last Tuesday, my battery died just as I needed to confirm details for a donor call. Julian was nearby, so I grabbed his phone. It was already unlocked, which was convenient. I logged into my email, sent a quick confirmation, and handed it back. 30 seconds, maybe less. I made a note of that. Did you notice anything unusual about the device?" "Not really." It was newer. He'd gotten it a couple of months ago and complained about transferring all his contacts. I saw a few open apps, nothing out of the ordinary. Just work stuff. Who else at the Foundation had issues with Julian? Her expression grew thoughtful. Julian can be principled to a fault. He doesn't compromise easily, which sometimes created friction. He clashed with Marjorie over the digital platform, thought it was an expensive distraction from community programs. He also had run-ins with Anton Rees about using the test kitchens for workshops. Anton's very territorial. And Gabriel Virelli. Gabriel tries to keep everyone happy, but he's focused on the Foundation's image. This scandal is his worst nightmare. He and Marjorie work closely together. She's essentially his right hand. As she talked, I caught something subtle, a faint scent of bergamot and lavender that seemed to follow her gestures. It was distinctive, the kind of detail that stays with you. What about Heritage Bay Culinary? Never heard of it. Our finance team flags unfamiliar vendors immediately. It's not one of our registered suppliers. Did you know the security cameras were offline when Julian got his new phone? Genuine surprise crossed her face. No, I had no idea. That seems like a significant security lapse. After she left for her lunch appointment, I reflected on the conversation. Dana Marsh seemed forthright enough, but her account of borrowing Julian's phone was exactly what someone would say if they'd done something more sinister. The unlocked device, the quick access. It was almost too convenient. Return to the brownstone. Back at the brownstone, I found the familiar atmosphere of controlled calm that always surrounded Wolfe's domain. But something felt different as I entered the office. A subtle shift in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. Wolfe looked up from his papers as I settled into my chair. Well, Dana Marsh paints a picture of Foundation politics that's more complex than advertised. She claims the phone borrowing was innocent, but the timing and circumstances are suspicious. Also, she wears bergamot and lavender, distinctive combination. Noted. And her assessment of the Foundation's internal dynamics. I gave him a complete rundown of Dana's observations about the various personalities and conflicts. Wolfe listened with his eyes closed, occasionally grunting acknowledgement. Interesting, he said when I finished. Miss Marsh positions herself as an observer rather than a participant, yet she occupies a role that requires considerable manipulation of people and circumstances. Before I could respond, something nagged at my attention, a subtle wrongness in the familiar environment of the office. I stood and walked to Wolfe's desk, studying the arrangement of objects with the eye of someone who knew their precise positions. Mr. Wolfe, I said slowly, your paperweight has been moved. His eyes snapped open. Explain. The black marble block that holds your correspondence, it's rotated a quarter turn from its usual position. You never move it. I leaned closer, examining the desk surface. And there's a faint smear on the blotter, glossy, where someone reached across. Wolfe's expression grew thunderous. Continue. I picked up the stack of printouts Nora Pell had provided. The page showing Anton's failed login attempts at 9:12 p.m. It's missing. The silence that followed was electric with controlled fury. Wolfe's stillness became absolute, the calm of a predator calculating its response. Fritz, he called. Fritz appeared immediately, his usual serenity intact. Have you entered my office since breakfast? No, sir. Theodore. In the plant rooms, I confirmed. Want me to check if he noticed anything? Wolfe raised his hand slightly. Later. First, we inventory. We went through the office methodically. Nothing else appeared missing or disturbed, but when you know a room as intimately as Wolfe knew his, a rotated paperweight was as obvious as a shout. This is not mere burglary, Wolfe said finally. It is a message. Someone wished us to know they had been here while leaving minimal evidence of their presence. Why take only the page about Anton's failed logins? Because our adversary wishes us to focus on the obvious suspect, the temperamental chef with access issues, rather than the careful minds behind the deception. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. They believe we are like the Foundation's board. We see a convenient scapegoat and stop investigating. The kitchen violation. Fritz appeared in the doorway, his face bearing an expression I'd rarely seen, confusion mixed with indignation. Mr. Wolfe, he said, his careful English touched with distress. Someone has disturbed my spices. We followed him to the kitchen where Fritz's domain usually reflected the perfect order of his mind. He led us to the spice rack, pointing to two nearly identical jars. The Malabar pepper and the Sarawak pepper have been reversed. I did not do this, and the mace tin is not properly positioned." He gestured to the counter where the copper pot had rested. "There is also a mark here, as if someone lifted the pot and set it down slightly off its original position." Wolfe's face grew darker with each detail. The violation of his office was serious. The disturbance of Fritz's kitchen was war. "Archie," he said, his voice carrying the quiet menace of absolute authority, "did you touch the pot after yesterday's demonstration?" "No." "Fritz, I polished it and returned it to its proper place. I have not moved it since." Someone had stood in our kitchen, Wolfe's sanctum, and deliberately rearranged items with surgical precision. Not enough to cause real damage, but enough to send an unmistakable message. Wolfe's response. Back in the office, Wolfe settled into his chair with the gravitational certainty of a mountain finding its foundation. He didn't reach for his burr. He didn't open a book. He simply sat, thinking, for a full minute. "This changes the nature of our investigation," he said finally. "Someone has trespassed, not once, but twice. My office and Fritz's kitchen. They possess considerable skill in bypassing security and intimate knowledge of our routines. Inside job? Unlikely. But someone with access to the building or exceptional technical capabilities." He opened his eyes and fixed me with his steady gaze. More significantly, they wished us to know of their presence while demonstrating their capabilities. "This is not the work of a desperate embezzler, but of someone with considerable confidence in their abilities." I thought about Dana Marsh's distinctive scent, her convenient explanations, her positioning as an innocent observer. The bergamot and lavender, I caught traces of it in here. Wolfe's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Indeed, Miss Marsh's distinctive fragrance, yet that could be coincidental. She might have visited legitimately at some point. Or she might have been here more recently than she admitted." "Precisely." He leaned back, his expression growing thoughtful. "We are dealing with someone who possesses technical sophistication, intimate knowledge of the Foundation's operations, and the audacity to violate my home. They have also demonstrated considerable skill in social engineering and misdirection." The phone rang, interrupting his analysis. I answered to find Celia Voss, her voice tight with panic. "Mr. Goodwin, Julian's been arrested. Federal agents came with a warrant an hour ago. They said they found evidence he accessed the Foundation system from his home computer Tuesday night. The trap tightens. They found login records from his laptop showing access at 9:18 p.m., Celia continued. "But that's impossible. He was with me the entire evening, and his laptop was in his messenger bag by the door." I relayed this to Wolfe, who absorbed the information with grim satisfaction. "As expected," he said. "Our adversary has completed their frame. Mr. Craig's laptop was compromised, most likely with remote access software installed during a previous opportunity." "Dana Marsh visited Celia's apartment 3 weeks ago," I said. "She would have had opportunity to observe the layout, including where Julian typically left his bag." Wolfe nodded slowly. The pattern becomes clearer. Someone with technical expertise, personal access to the targets, and intimate knowledge of their habits orchestrated this deception. They elevated Mr. Craig's system privileges, installed monitoring software on his laptop, and used his credentials while he was occupied with the source demonstration. Setting the stage. "Archie," Wolfe said, reaching for his beer with deliberate care. "You will contact Miss Marsh and invite her to join us this evening. Tell her we have questions about the Foundation's security procedures and her observations about recent events. And if she declines, appeal to her concern about being implicated in a federal investigation. If that fails, mention that we have evidence of unauthorized access to this building and are prepared to share it with the appropriate authorities." He took a measured sip of beer. "You will also call Inspector Kramer and inform him that we have information relevant to the Craig investigation. Do not elaborate. Simply indicate that we expect to have significant developments by tomorrow." As I reached for the phone, Wolfe offered a final observation. Our adversary has demonstrated considerable skill in manipulation and misdirection. They have violated my home, framed an innocent man, and attempted to control our investigation through selective evidence removal. Tomorrow, we will discover whether their confidence in their abilities is justified. The game had entered a new phase. The brownstone had been violated, the evidence manipulated, and Julian Craig sat in federal custody while the real perpetrator remained free. But Wolfe's controlled fury and methodical approach suggested that our adversary's boldness might prove to be their downfall. The copper pot still gleamed on Fritz's counter, a reminder of the perfect alibi that had been weaponized against the innocent. Soon, we would discover whether justice could be served as precisely as a Duquette reduction sauce. The trap was set. Now we would see who would be caught in it. I started the evening's work with Inspector Kramer, who answered his phone with the enthusiasm of a man discovering his coffee had gone cold. Kramer here. Inspector, Archie Goodwin. We have developments in the Craig matter that you'll want to hear before the federal boys make you look like you're reading yesterday's paper. A grunt and the sound of a match striking. Your boss cooking up another one of his theatrical productions. Mr. Wolfe has identified significant irregularities in the evidence against Craig. The laptop tampering goes deeper than simple credential theft, and we have reason to believe the real perpetrator is still operating freely. I paused to let that sink in. Also, someone broke into the brownstone yesterday afternoon. Professional job, minimal disturbance, but they left calling cards. Calling cards? The kind that come in bottles of bergamot and lavender. Mr. Wolfe requests your presence tomorrow evening at 9. Bring a stenographer. You'll want an official record of what gets said. Kramer's silence stretched long enough for me to hear him thinking. You're telling me someone connected to this embezzlement case had the brass to burgle Nero Wolfe? I'm telling you that whoever framed Julian Craig is sophisticated, confident, and apparently believes they can manipulate this investigation from the shadows. Mr. Wolfe finds that presumption instructive. 9 o'clock, he said finally. This better not be another one of your boss's lectures on the inadequacy of police work. Inspector, when has Mr. Wolfe ever been wrong about inadequacy? He hung up with what might have been a chuckle. Saul's investigation. Next came Saul Panzer, who answered on the first ring with his usual economy. Saul, we need a complete background workup on Dana Marsh. Financial, personal, professional, the works. Pay special attention to any gambling, activities, debt problems, or unusual income sources. Also check family connections, particularly anyone with technical expertise. How deep? Deep enough to find what she doesn't want found. And Saul, she's meeting with Foundation people tonight. If you can get eyes on those conversations without compromising yourself, do it. Got it. When do you need this? Yesterday would be good. This morning will have to do. By 7:30 the next evening, Saul had delivered a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. I spread the contents across my desk while Wolfe observed from his chair, a glass of beer untouched at his elbow. Miss Marsh, I reported, scanning Saul's meticulous notes, has been living considerably above her foundation salary. High-stakes poker games in private clubs, frequent trips to Atlantic City, and what appears to be a serious gambling problem. She's into various creditors for approximately $80,000. Wolfe's eyebrows rose fractionally. Continue. More interesting, her father, Robert Marsh, spent 20 years developing secure remote access software for government contractors. The specific type of malware found on Julian's laptop matches proprietary tools from his former company, tools that were supposedly destroyed when the contracts ended. Ah, Wolfe murmured. Family expertise, financial desperation, and intimate access to the target. The triangle of opportunity completes itself. There's more. Saul tracked her movements yesterday afternoon during that 20-minute absence from the board meeting. Security cameras show her leaving the Foundation at 2:18 p.m. and returning at 2:41 p.m. Transit time to here and back is exactly 23 minutes if you know the shortcuts, and don't worry about speed limits. The evening confrontation. Dana Marsh arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, her professional composure intact, but showing hairline cracks around the edges. She wore a navy suit that whispered expensive and carried herself with the controlled grace of someone who had spent years managing other people's expectations. The bergamot and lavender preceded her into the office like an accusation. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, settling into the red leather chair. "I understand you have questions about Foundation security procedures. I'm happy to help, though I should mention that our legal counsel advised caution regarding ongoing federal investigations." Wolfe observed her with the steady attention of a jeweler examining a stone for flaws. "Miss Marsh, your caution is understandable but misdirected. We are not investigating Foundation security. We are investigating the violation of mine." The slightest tightening around her eyes. "I'm not sure I understand." "Someone entered this house yesterday afternoon with considerable skill and intimate knowledge of our routines. They disturbed specific items in my office and Fritz's kitchen and removed a single page from our investigation files." His voice carried the quiet authority of established fact. "That person left traces of bergamot and lavender." She set her purse down with deliberate care. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Wolfe. Are you suggesting I committed burglary?" "I am stating that someone wearing your distinctive fragrance violated my sanctum. Whether that person was you or someone with access to your perfume remains to be determined." Fritz appeared with coffee and beer, his movements carrying their usual precision but with an undertone of controlled indignation. The violation of his kitchen clearly rankled him more than he would admit. "Tell me about your visit to Miss Voss's apartment 3 weeks ago," Wolfe continued after Fritz departed. "Celia was overwhelmed with the digitization project. I brought dinner and we discussed workflow improvements." Her voice remained steady, but I caught the slight hesitation before she continued. "Julian was there briefly, working on grant applications. He mentioned having computer problems, slow performance, unexpected pop-ups." "What did you recommend?" "I suggested he have Nora look at it, but he said he'd handle it himself." She lifted her coffee cup but didn't drink. Men can be stubborn about admitting they need technical help. "Indeed. And your 20-minute absence from yesterday's board meeting?" "I retrieved donor correspondence that Conrad requested. The files were in my office, and I had to locate specific documents." She met his gaze steadily. "There are security cameras, key card logs, witnesses to verify my presence at the Foundation. Yet someone with your distinctive fragrance was here during that precise window," Wolfe observed. "Unless, of course, you have been careless with your perfume bottles." Before she could respond, the phone rang. I answered to find a federal agent whose voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Mr. Goodwin, Agent Patterson, FBI, Computer Crimes Unit. We've completed our analysis of Julian Craig's laptop. The remote access software was installed 3 weeks ago using a technique that required physical access to the device. The control server was wiped clean yesterday afternoon, but we recovered fragments showing the software was activated multiple times over the past 2 weeks. I relayed this information to Wolfe, who absorbed it with the satisfaction of a mathematician confirming a proof. Dana's coffee cup rattled slightly against its saucer. "Miss Marsh," Wolfe said, his voice growing softer and therefore more dangerous, "you present interesting contradictions. You claim innocence of technical manipulation, yet demonstrate intimate knowledge of Mr. Craig's computer problems. You provide an alibi for yesterday afternoon, yet cannot explain the presence of your fragrance in my violated office." "I don't know how my perfume could be here," she said, but her voice had lost its earlier steadiness. Perhaps because you were here, I suggested. Installing remote access software on Julian's laptop 3 weeks ago required considerable technical expertise. Your father's background in secure remote access systems would have provided that expertise. Her face went pale. You've been investigating my family. Miss Marsh, Wolfe said, leaning forward slightly. You are in considerable debt due to gambling activities. You had intimate access to Mr. Craig through your previous relationship and your visit to Miss Voss's apartment. You possessed technical knowledge through family connections, and you were absent from the Foundation yesterday afternoon for precisely the time required to travel here and back. The silence stretched like a wire under tension. Dana set down her coffee cup and stared at her hands. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she said finally, her voice barely audible. Julian wasn't supposed to be arrested. Explain. The original plan was minor embezzlement, enough to discredit Julian's opposition to certain Foundation projects, maybe get him transferred to a less influential position. But the amounts kept growing, and other people got involved with their own agendas. What other people? She looked up, her professional composure finally cracking. I think I need to call my attorney. That is your prerogative, Wolfe said. However, federal investigators will soon trace the remote access software to its source. Your cooperation now might influence how prosecutors view your role in this conspiracy. The larger pattern. Miss Marsh, Wolfe continued, you have been manipulated by someone far more ruthless than you understood. The escalation from minor fraud to major embezzlement, the timing of various security lapses, the careful orchestration of evidence. These suggest a mastermind who used your skills and desperation for their own purposes. Dana's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. I installed the software, yes, but I didn't control what happened afterward. Someone else was pulling the strings, making the transfers, deciding how much to steal. Who? I don't know for certain. Communications were always indirect, through encrypted messages and coded conversations. But someone at the Foundation was coordinating everything, someone with administrative access and intimate knowledge of the financial systems. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, then fixed her with his steady gaze. Miss Marsh, you will return tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock, accompanied by your attorney if you wish. At that time, I will be convening a gathering of all relevant parties to this matter. Your full cooperation then may determine whether you face charges as a principal or as an accomplice. As she gathered her things to leave, her hands shaking slightly, I reflected that we had reached the crucial juncture in the case. The technical mystery was largely solved, the human motivations revealed, but the true mastermind remained hidden behind layers of manipulation and misdirection. Archie, Wolfe said, after she left, contact Miss Voss and Mr. Craig's attorney. Inform them that we will have significant developments tomorrow evening. Also call Gabriel Virelli, Marjorie Lentz, and the others. Tell them their presence is required for a matter affecting the Foundation's future. All of them? All of them. It is time to gather the players and expose the hand that has been moving the pieces. He reached for his beer with deliberate satisfaction. Our adversary has been skillful, but they made one crucial error. They violated my home. That transforms this from a mere case into a matter of personal principle. The stage was set for the final confrontation. Dana Marsh's partial confession had revealed the technical aspects of the conspiracy, but the identity of the true mastermind remained hidden. Tomorrow evening, in the familiar setting of Wolfe's office, all the threads would finally be woven together into a complete pattern. The copper pot still gleamed in Fritz's kitchen, a reminder that the most precise recipes, whether for sauces or for justice, required perfect timing and unwavering attention to detail. The endgame was approaching, and Nero Wolfe was ready to serve the final course. The Friday morning air carried the weight of impending resolution into the brownstone. Wolfe was already at his desk when I descended, surrounded by reports and documents arranged with the precision of a general planning a decisive battle. He was consuming only half his breakfast, which meant he was either deep in contemplation or preparing something particularly unpleasant for someone. With Wolfe, the distinction was often academic. "Archie," he said without looking up from Saul's latest findings, "we have reached the point where speculation must yield to demonstration. The technical evidence is complete, the human motivations are clear, and the time has arrived to gather our players for the final movement of this particular symphony." I poured coffee and settled into my chair, noting the methodical arrangement of documents on his desk. "And our conductor will be revealed through the simple expedient of allowing each participant to demonstrate their knowledge of facts they should not possess." He lifted a bank statement and studied it through his reading glasses. "Saul's tracing of the Heritage Bay culinary funds confirms our suspicions. The shell company was created using Foundation letterhead. The bank account was opened with forged authorization, and the funds were routed through a complex series of transfers designed to obscure their ultimate destination. Coordinating the investigation. My first task was coordinating our field operatives. Saul Panzer had been tracking financial records with his usual thoroughness, while Fred Durkin maintained surveillance on Anton Rees, and Ori Kether watched Marjorie Lentz's movements with the patience of a hunter. Saul called first with results that made the morning significantly more interesting. "Got you, Shell. Company traced, Archie. Heritage Bay Culinary, LLC, Delaware, filing through Armitage registered agents. The bank account at Seagate Private in Stamford was opened using a board authorization letter on Conrad Larrabee's letterhead, but the signature analysis shows it's a forgery. Skilled, but not perfect." "How skilled?" "Skilled enough to fool a bank officer, but the watermark stock matches a specific batch ordered by the Foundation last winter. Short run, traceable. Whoever opened that account had access to the actual letterhead." I relayed this to Wolfe, who absorbed the information with the satisfaction of a chess master confirming a crucial gambit. "Excellent. The technical sophistication combined with intimate access to Foundation materials narrows our field considerably. Fred's report on Anton Rees proved equally illuminating. The chef's been agitated all morning, making calls to his bank and what looks like his attorney. He met with someone from the Foundation's legal team at 11:30. Brief conversation, but he came out looking like he'd been told something he didn't want to hear. Ori's surveillance of Marjorie Lentz provided the most intriguing details. She left the Foundation at 1:40 yesterday, returned at 2:36. During her absence, she met with a representative from Fairmont Digital in a cafe on West 4th. I observed her passing a thumb drive in what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated exchange. Fairmont Digital. Primary vendor for the Foundation's digital platform project, Ori confirmed. The same project Julian Craig opposed and the same budget amount that was stolen through Heritage Bay Culinary. The technical evidence. By afternoon, we had assembled a comprehensive picture of the conspiracy's technical aspects. The remote access software installed on Julian's laptop was sophisticated enough to require professional expertise, yet specific enough to have identifiable characteristics. The timing of the transfers, the manipulation of backup codes, and the convenient security lapses all pointed to someone with administrative access and detailed knowledge of the Foundation's systems. Most significantly, the digital forensics revealed that the Heritage Bay vendor record had been created from the Foundation's finance workstation using administrative privileges that required biometric authentication. The logs showed 2 people present during the creation, exactly the security protocol the Foundation used for sensitive financial operations. Extending the invitations. At 4 o'clock, I began the delicate process of extending Wolfe's invitations to the evening's gathering. These were not requests. They were summons delivered with the subtle pressure that Wolfe had perfected over decades of compelling reluctant witnesses to attend his revelations. Gabriel Varelli answered his phone with the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to controlling conversations. That confidence wavered slightly when I explained the evening's purpose. "Mr. Goodwin, I appreciate Mr. Wolfe's thoroughness, but I have a board dinner scheduled for 8:30. Mr. Varelli, you'll want to cancel that dinner. Mr. Wolfe has identified the party responsible for the embezzlement and the framing of Julian Craig. He prefers to present his findings in a controlled environment before they become public knowledge and potentially devastate the Foundation's reputation." A pause. Public knowledge? Mr. Wolfe is not fond of having his investigation manipulated or his home violated. 9 o'clock. Be prompt. Marjorie Lentz proved more challenging, her professional efficiency extending to deflecting unwanted obligations. "Mr. Goodwin, I am COO of a major foundation. I have no obligation to attend a private detective's theatrical presentation. Miss Lentz, you have an obligation to the truth and to protecting the Foundation from scandal. Mr. Wolfe has compiled considerable evidence about the technical manipulation of your financial systems, the creation of shell companies, and the sophisticated frame-up of an innocent man. As COO, you would be particularly interested in the forensic accounting aspects and the implications for Foundation security." Her silence stretched long enough for me to hear her calculating the risks of attendance versus absence. 9 o'clock, she said finally. "I trust this won't be a waste of time." Anton Reese exploded with his characteristic volatility. "That man Wolfe is a charlatan. I have nothing to say to either of you. Chef Reese, you may recall Mr. Wolfe's observation about departing his sidewalk on your knees. Tonight, you have an opportunity to hear the truth about who betrayed the Foundation and why your name appears in the digital evidence. Or you can remain in the dark while others draw their own conclusions about your involvement." "My involvement? I'm a victim. Then you have nothing to fear." 9 o'clock. Be punctual. Conrad Larrabee required the most careful handling, his board chair authority making him resistant to external direction. "Mr. Goodwin, I fail to see why I should interrupt my evening for a private detective's theories." "Mr. Larrabee, Mr. Wolfe has uncovered evidence of forged documents bearing your letterhead, unauthorized use of Foundation resources, and a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of your organization. He believes you would wish to be fully informed before these matters become public and potentially destroy the Foundation's credibility." The mention of forged letterhead got his attention. "Forged documents?" "Among other things." 9 o'clock. Mr. Larrabee. Mr. Wolfe will not repeat himself. Preparing the stage. As evening approached, Fritz transformed the office into a theater for justice with his usual meticulous attention to detail. The red leather chairs were arranged in a precise semicircle that would allow Wolfe to observe every face while ensuring no participant could avoid his penetrating gaze. Coffee was prepared to Fritz's exacting standards, though the atmosphere was too charged for anyone to show much interest in refreshment. The copper pot that had started this entire affair was positioned prominently on the side table, not as decoration, but as a reminder of the perfect alibi that had been weaponized against an innocent man. 2 identical spice jars sat on Wolfe's desk, their labels turned inward, waiting to reveal who possessed intimate knowledge of Fritz's violated kitchen. Wolfe surveyed these preparations with the satisfaction of a conductor preparing for a particularly complex symphony. Every detail had been calculated, every position chosen for maximum psychological impact. The violation of his sanctuary had transformed this from a mere case into a matter of personal principle, and Nero Wolfe's principles, once engaged, were as immovable as mountains. "Archie," he said as the clock approached 8:30, "we are about to witness the unraveling of a conspiracy that combined technical sophistication with human weakness, financial desperation with institutional betrayal. The perpetrator believed they could manipulate both systems and people with impunity. And now, Now they will discover that some violations carry consequences beyond their calculations. He opened his beer with ceremonial precision. The stage is set, the evidence is complete, and justice awaits its moment of revelation. The doorbell chimed at precisely 8:30, announcing the arrival of the first participants in what would prove to be Nero Wolfe's most methodical dissection of institutional corruption and personal betrayal. The copper pot gleamed in the lamplight, the spice jars waited in silent testimony, and the master of the brownstone prepared to conduct his final, decisive movement in the symphony of truth. The game that had begun with a desperate plea and a borrowed kitchen was about to reach its climactic resolution, and Nero Wolfe was ready to serve justice with the same precision that Fritz brought to his finest sauces. The office filled with the electric tension of a thunderstorm about to break. By 9 o'clock, every chair in the carefully arranged semicircle was occupied, each participant bearing the distinct expression of someone who suspected the evening would not end as they hoped. Inspector Kramer had positioned himself near the door with his stenographer, his weathered face wearing the resigned expression of a man who had attended too many of Wolfe's theatrical revelations to harbor illusions about their brevity. Julian Craig and Celia Voss sat together in the corner, their intertwined hands betraying both hope and terror as they contemplated the possibility of vindication or deeper ruin. Gabriel Virelli occupied his chair with the careful composure of a man accustomed to board meetings, though the slight tremor in his left eye suggested his confidence was more performance than conviction. Beside him, Conrad Larrabee commanded attention with the unconscious authority of decades in leadership, his jaw set in preparation for unpleasant revelations. Anton Ries had arrived in his pristine chef's jacket, as if formal attire could armor him against accusations. His hands remained clenched in his lap, ready for combat rather than conversation. Nora Pell sat quietly near the stenographer, her technical expertise having already contributed crucial evidence to the evening's proceedings. Dana Marsh entered last, accompanied by a sharp-featured attorney whose expensive suit marked him as someone who specialized in damage control. The bergamot and lavender that had become her unwitting signature preceded her into the room like an accusation, while her hollow-eyed exhaustion spoke of sleepless nights contemplating ruin. But it was Marjorie Lentz who commanded the most attention, not through any dramatic gesture, but through her absolute stillness. She sat with the rigid posture of someone who had built her career on meticulous control, her briefcase positioned defensively at her feet, her expression suggesting she viewed this gathering as an inconvenient interruption to more important matters. Wolfe's opening gambit. Nero. Wolfe surveyed this assembly with the satisfaction of a conductor who had achieved perfect acoustics for his most complex symphony. He settled behind his desk with gravitational certainty, the copper pot gleaming on the side table and two identical spice jars positioned prominently on his blotter, their labels turned inward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you're gathered because someone in this room orchestrated the theft of $231,000 from the Duquette Foundation while framing an innocent man for their crimes. This conspiracy combined technical sophistication with institutional betrayal and culminated in the violation of my home." Gabriel shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Wolfe, the evidence against Julian Craig is overwhelming. The FBI has confirmed that Mr. Craig's laptop was compromised with remote access software installed 3 weeks ago." Wolfe interrupted smoothly. "They have also confirmed that the Heritage Bay Culinary Shell Company was created using forged foundation letterhead, and that the receiving bank account was opened through fraudulent authorization." He lifted one of the spice jars, turning it slowly in his massive hands. "But we begin with a simpler matter, the violation of my kitchen yesterday afternoon. Someone entered this house with considerable skill and intimate knowledge of our routines. They removed a single page from my files and disturbed specific items in Fritz's domain, including reversing the positions of these two nearly identical spice containers. The technical framework. Miss Marsh, Wolfe continued, his gaze fixing on Dana with laser precision. You have confessed to installing remote access software on Mr. Craig's laptop under the guise of technical assistance. Your gambling debts made you susceptible to manipulation, but you were merely the technical instrument of this conspiracy, not its architect. Dana's attorney started to object, but she silenced him with a gesture. That's correct. Communications were always indirect. Encrypted messages, coded instructions. But the person directing me had intimate knowledge of Foundation operations and detailed information about Julian's routines. Wolfe nodded approvingly. The conspiracy required multiple elements operating in perfect coordination: technical expertise to install malware, administrative access to create vendor records and authorize transfers, intimate knowledge of security procedures, and the ability to manipulate timing across multiple systems. He lifted a financial report from his desk. The stolen amounts, $47,000, $89,000, and $95,000, appear random but total precisely the budget allocated for the digital culinary platform project. This was not mere embezzlement, but systematic theft designed to fund a specific initiative while eliminating its primary opponent. Eliminating false suspects. Mr. Reese, Wolfe said, turning to the chef. Your failed login attempts at 9:12 p.m. were clumsy, not criminal. You were attempting to access catering proposals through the wrong portal, an honest mistake that someone hoped would provide additional confusion in the digital evidence. Anton's face flushed. Exactly. I told everyone it was a mistake. Indeed. And the page detailing your failed attempts was removed from my files specifically to cast suspicion on you or to make me believe someone was protecting you, thus misdirecting my investigation. Wolfe's gaze moved to Gabriel Varelli. Mr. Varelli, you were present when Mr. Craig's system privileges were elevated 2 days before the final transfer. This occurred at the finance workstation, which requires biometric authentication and 2 people present. But your role was that of unwitting accomplice. You trusted your COO's explanation of a routine vendor payment issue. The mastermind revealed. Miss Lentz, Wolfe said, his voice growing softer and therefore more dangerous. You occupy the perfect position for this conspiracy. As COO, you have administrative access to all financial systems. You control backup authentication codes. You coordinate security maintenance schedules. You have access to Mr. Larrabee's letterhead stock. And you had the strongest motive, protecting your signature project from Mr. Craig's opposition. Marjorie's professional composure remained intact, but something flickered behind her eyes. Mr. Wolfe, these are serious accusations based on circumstantial evidence. I discovered the financial irregularities and reported them immediately. You discovered them at a remarkably convenient time, after the final transfer, but before anyone else might notice the discrepancies. Your audit focused exclusively on Mr. Craig's access records while ignoring other administrative activities, including your own. Wolfe reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a thumb drive. This device contains backup copies of communications between Heritage Bay Culinary and Fairmont Digital, including detailed specifications for enhanced platform features not approved by the Foundation's board. It was passed to a project manager yesterday afternoon in a carefully orchestrated exchange observed by my operative. The color drained from Marjorie's face. I have no knowledge of any unauthorized communications. Miss Lentz, you orchestrated this theft not for personal gain, but to create a parallel funding stream for platform enhancements the board had refused to approve. When Mr. Craig's principled opposition threatened your project's momentum, you decided to eliminate the obstacle while securing the resources. The trap springs. Wolfe picked up the 2 spice jars from his desk, their labels still turned inward. These containers hold Malabar pepper and Sarawak pepper, nearly identical to the untrained eye, but distinctly different to those with culinary expertise. Yesterday, someone with intimate knowledge of Fritz's kitchen deliberately reversed their positions. He turned the jars so their labels faced the room. This violation was not random vandalism, but a message, a demonstration of access and control. It required someone who understood both the significance of the reversal and Fritz's meticulous organizational system. Fritz stepped forward, his face solemn. The Malabar and Sarawak were indeed reversed. I did not move them. Wolfe pushed the jars slightly toward Marjorie. Miss Lentz, your meticulous nature extends to all aspects of your work, including your understanding of culinary precision. Tell me, which of these peppers would Master Duquette have specified for his 5-movement reduction sauce? The silence stretched like a wire under tension. Marjorie stared at the jars, her breath catching. A true culinary professional would know the answer instantly, but someone who had merely used the Duquette sauce as a convenient cover for their alibi might not. The Malabar, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Correct, Fritz interjected quietly. The Malabar's robust flavor withstands the long reduction. Sarawak is too delicate for such preparation. Wolfe's eyes never left Marjorie's face. You knew enough about the sauce preparation to understand it would provide Mr. Craig with an unbreakable alibi, making him the perfect scapegoat. But your knowledge was theoretical rather than practical, sufficient for your purposes, but insufficient to avoid this trap. The confession, the accumulated weight of evidence, technical, financial, and circumstantial, finally broke through Marjorie's professional armor. Her rigid posture collapsed slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the bitter precision of someone who had been caught in an intricate web of her own design. The digital platform could have revolutionized culinary education, she said quietly. The board's budget was inadequate for the full vision. We needed additional resources to implement features that would set us apart from every other foundation. So you stole them. I redirected them. Julian's community programs help a few dozen people at most. The platform could educate thousands, preserve culinary knowledge for future generations, create lasting institutional value. Her voice grew stronger, as if justifying her actions to herself. Julian's opposition was short-sighted, threatening something far more important than his small-scale initiatives. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. Miss Lentz, you betrayed the trust of your institution, framed an innocent colleague, manipulated a desperate accomplice, and violated my home to protect your conspiracy. Your vision, however noble in your mind, was built on theft, deception, and the destruction of a good man's reputation. Resolution and justice. Inspector Kramer rose slowly, handcuffs already in his hands. Marjorie Lentz, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marjorie looked around the room with the hollow gaze of someone discovering that intelligence without wisdom leads inevitably to destruction. The platform would have been extraordinary, she said softly, as if the words could somehow justify everything. Miss Lentz, Wolfe replied with quiet finality, the road to institutional ruin is paved with noble intentions and justified theft. You confused personal ambition with institutional necessity, and that confusion has destroyed both your career and your cause. As the various participants filed out, some in custody, others in disgrace, and Julian Craig finally free to rebuild his reputation, the office gradually returned to its familiar tranquility. The copper pot that had started this entire affair gleamed in the lamplight, no longer evidence, but simply a beautiful piece of cookware waiting to return to its proper domain. Archie, Wolfe said with deep satisfaction. Fritz will be pleased to know that his kitchen has been avenged and his spices restored to their intended positions. Justice, like a perfect reduction sauce, requires precise timing, constant attention, and the absolute refusal to accept substitutes for genuine ingredients. The case of the perfect alibi had been solved not through the alibi itself, but through the methodical exposure of those who had tried to weaponize precision against the innocent. The brownstone had been violated but ultimately vindicated, and the recipe for justice had proven as reliable as any in Fritz's extensive collection. The game was over, the truth revealed, and dinner, as always, would be served precisely on time. The office had transformed into a theater of justice, every red leather chair occupied by players in a drama that was about to reach its inevitable conclusion. Inspector Kramer positioned himself near the door with his stenographer, wearing the resigned expression of a man who had witnessed enough of Wolfe's revelations to know they were always worth the wait, however theatrical the presentation. Julian Craig and Celia Voss sat with the tense stillness of people balanced on the edge of vindication or deeper ruin. Gabriel Varelli maintained his boardroom composure, though the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his growing unease. Conrad Larrabee commanded attention through sheer force of presence, his jaw set for unpleasant truths. Anton Reese had arrived in his pristine chef's jacket, as if formal attire could armor him against accusations, while Nora Pell observed everything with the sharp attention of someone who understood that technical details would prove crucial. Dana Marsh entered last with her attorney, the bergamot and lavender scent that had become her unwitting signature preceding her like evidence. But it was Marjorie Lentz who drew the most attention through her absolute stillness. She sat with the rigid posture of someone who had built her career on meticulous control. Her briefcase positioned defensively, her expression suggesting she viewed this gathering as an inconvenient interruption to more important matters. Wolfe's methodical exposition. Nero Wolfe surveyed this assembly with the satisfaction of a conductor who had achieved perfect acoustics for his most complex performance. The copper pot gleamed on the side table like a witness waiting to testify, while two identical spice jars sat on his desk with their labels turned inward, awaiting their moment of revelation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you are gathered because someone in this room orchestrated the theft of $231,000 from the Duquette Foundation while framing an innocent man for their crimes. This conspiracy required technical sophistication, institutional access, and the calculated manipulation of human weakness." Gabriel Varelli shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Wolfe, the federal evidence against Julian is quite compelling." The federal evidence, Mr. Varelli, was carefully constructed to appear compelling while obscuring the true perpetrator. Wolfe's interruption carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "We begin with Mr. Craig's alibi, his presence in Miss Voss's kitchen, preparing a Duquette reduction sauce that demanded 48 minutes of continuous, precise attention. This demonstration proved conclusively that he could not have accessed the Foundation's computer system at the moment the final transfer occurred." He paused, allowing this foundation to settle. However, the strength of this alibi was precisely what made it useful to the true perpetrator. It provided perfect cover for remote access to Mr. Craig's laptop, compromised 3 weeks earlier when Miss Marsh installed sophisticated software during her visit to Miss Voss's apartment. Dana's face went pale, but she remained silent as her attorney had undoubtedly instructed. "Miss Marsh," Wolfe continued, "your gambling debts made you susceptible to manipulation, and your father's expertise in secure remote access systems provided the necessary technical knowledge. You were the instrument of this conspiracy, but not its architect." The technical framework. The stolen funds, $47,000, $89,000, and $95,000, appear random but total, precisely the budget allocated for the digital platform project. The Heritage Bay Culinary Shell Company was created using Foundation letterhead, with bank accounts opened through forged authorization bearing Mr. Larrabee's signature. Conrad Larrabee's expression darkened. Forged authorization. Indeed. Someone with access to your letterhead stock and considerable skill in document forgery. The vendor records were created from the Foundation's finance workstation, requiring biometric authentication and 2 people present, a security protocol that was exploited rather than bypassed. Wolfe's gaze moved systematically across the room. Mr. Varelli, you were present during the elevation of Mr. Craig's system privileges 2 days before the final transfer, believing it to be routine maintenance. You were an unwitting accomplice, manipulated by someone you trusted implicitly. The violation revealed the conspiracy extended beyond mere theft to active misdirection. Mr. Reese, your failed login attempts at 9:12 p.m. were not coincidental. They were designed to cast suspicion on you. When this investigation began, the record of those attempts was removed from my files by someone who entered this house with considerable skill and intimate knowledge of our routines. Wolfe's voice grew softer and therefore more dangerous. This violation extended to Fritz's kitchen, where someone deliberately reversed the positions of 2 nearly identical spice containers. To the casual observer, a minor disruption. To those with true culinary knowledge, a deliberate message. He lifted the 2 spice jars from his desk, their labels still hidden. These containers hold Malabar pepper and Sarawak pepper, nearly identical in appearance but distinctly different in culinary application, particularly in complex reduction sauces. The trap springs. Miss Lentz, Wolfe said, his gaze fixing on the COO with laser precision. You occupy the perfect position for this conspiracy. Administrative access to all financial systems, control of backup authentication codes, coordination of security maintenance schedules, access to letterhead stock, and the strongest motive, protecting your signature project from Mr. Craig's principled opposition. Marjorie's professional composure remained intact, but something flickered behind her eyes. Mr. Wolfe, these are serious accusations, based on circumstantial evidence. Indeed, they are serious. You orchestrated this theft not for personal gain, but to create unauthorized funding for platform enhancements the board had refused to approve. When Mr. Craig's opposition threatened your project's momentum, you decided to eliminate the obstacle while securing the resources. Wolfe slowly turned the spice jars so their labels faced the room. Tell me, Miss Lentz, which of these peppers would Master Duquette have specified for his 5-movement reduction sauce? The silence stretched like a wire under tension. Marjorie stared at the jars, her breath catching. The Malabar, she said finally. But her voice lacked conviction. Fritz stepped forward from the kitchen doorway. Correct, he said quietly. The Malabar's robust flavor withstands the long reduction. Sarawak would be too delicate for such preparation. The confession. The accumulated weight of evidence, technical, financial, and psychological, finally broke through Marjorie's professional armor. Her rigid posture collapsed slightly, and when she spoke, her voice carried the bitter precision of someone caught in a web of her own design. The digital platform could have revolutionized culinary education, she said, her words barely audible. The board's budget was inadequate for the full vision. Julian's opposition was short-sighted, threatening something far more important than his small-scale programs. So you stole the funds and framed him for the theft. I redirected resources toward their highest use. The platform could educate thousands, preserve culinary knowledge for generations. Her voice grew stronger, as if justifying her actions to herself. Julian's community programs helped dozens at most. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. Miss Lentz, you betrayed institutional trust, framed an innocent colleague, manipulated a desperate accomplice, and violated my home to protect your conspiracy. Your vision, however noble in your estimation, was built on theft, deception, and the destruction of a good man's reputation. Justice served, Inspector Kramer rose slowly, handcuffs already prepared. Marjorie Lentz, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Marjorie looked around the room with the hollow gaze of someone discovering that intelligence without wisdom leads inevitably to ruin. The platform would have been extraordinary, she whispered, as if the words could somehow justify everything. Miss Lentz, Wolfe replied with quiet finality, the road to institutional destruction is paved with noble intentions and justified theft. You confused personal ambition with institutional necessity, and that confusion has destroyed both your career and your cause. The aftermath. As the various participants departed, some in custody, others in disgrace, and Julian Craig finally free to reclaim his reputation, the office gradually returned to its familiar tranquility. The copper pot that had initiated this entire affair no longer served as evidence, but simply awaited return to its proper domain. Fritz appeared to restore the room's geometry with his usual precision, giving the copper pot a respectful nod that acknowledged its service to justice. The two spice jars were returned to their rightful places, their brief role as instruments of revelation concluded. Archie, Wolfe said with deep satisfaction, Fritz will be pleased to know that his kitchen has been avenged and his spices restored to their intended positions. Justice, like a perfect reduction sauce, requires precise timing, constant attention, and absolute refusal to accept substitutes for genuine ingredients. The case of the perfect alibi had been solved not through the alibi itself, but through the methodical exposure of those who had tried to weaponize precision against the innocent. The brownstone had been violated but ultimately vindicated, and the recipe for justice had proven as reliable as any in Fritz's extensive collection. The game was over, the truth revealed, and dinner, as always, would be served precisely on time. The morning after justice had been served brought the kind of October silence that makes the brownstone feel like a sanctuary properly restored. I found Wolfe in his office at the unusual hour of 9:15, already positioned behind his desk with the morning paper folded beside an untouched cup of coffee. The familiar rhythm had reasserted itself. Fritz moving through the kitchen with his customary precision, the orchids waiting patiently for their 11 o'clock audience, and the world once again properly aligned around Nero Wolfe's immovable center. The sharp scent of bergamot and lavender that had lingered like an accusation had finally dissipated, replaced by the comforting aroma of beeswax polish and old leather. Even the paperweight on Wolfe's desk had resumed its proper orientation, the violation of our sanctuary erased through the simple expedient of justice properly administered. The legal resolution Inspector Kramer called at precisely 10 o'clock, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man whose paperwork was finally in order. "Your boy Craig is officially cleared," he reported without preamble. "Federal prosecutors dropped all charges this morning. Lentz is looking at 5 to 7 federal, plus whatever the state wants to add for document forgery. And Miss Marsh? Plea agreement. 2 years minimum security in exchange for full cooperation. Her gambling debts made her more victim than villain, according to the federal boys." A pause for what sounded like coffee consumption. "She's already given us chapter and verse on the shell company, the pass-throughs, the whole digital manipulation scheme." I relayed this to Wolfe, who received it with the equanimity of someone who had never doubted the eventual triumph of properly applied logic. The law, like a well-tended sauce, reduces patiently until the residue is strong enough to be palatable. Visitors and vindication, Julian Craig and Celia Voss, arrived at 11:30, carrying a package that Fritz received with the reverence due to any offering from serious practitioners of culinary arts. They looked like people who had emerged from a long tunnel into unexpected sunlight, relieved, grateful, and slightly stunned by the speed of their transformation from suspects to advocates for institutional reform. "Mr. Wolfe," Celia said, settling into the red leather chair, We can never adequately express our gratitude. Julian's reputation, the Foundation's integrity, even the preservation of Duquette's legacy, all of it was at risk. The risk was created by those who confused institutional loyalty with personal ambition, Wolfe replied. Your Duquette reduction provided not merely an alibi, but a demonstration of the precision that Miss Lentz's conspiracy sought to destroy. Julian stepped forward with the earnestness that had made him both an effective advocate and a target for those who preferred expedience to principle. Gabriel offered me the assistant director position this morning, along with a formal apology. They've also asked me to head the new ethics committee. Accept both, Wolfe said without hesitation. The institution requires someone who has learned the true cost of corruption. As they prepared to leave, Julian faltered slightly. I don't know how to properly thank you for— Mary, Wolfe interrupted. That stopped both of them. They looked at each other, and their faces did something that would have made even Inspector Kramer avert his eyes. We were planning December, Celia said, cheeks coloring. Sooner, Wolfe advised with the authority of absolute certainty. The interval between catastrophe and celebration should be brief. It confuses misfortune. The copper pot's farewell Fritz appeared to collect the package they had brought, the copper pot that had started this entire affair, now properly cleaned and ready for its journey home. He handled it with the reverence of a priest managing sacred vessels, giving it a final polish before carrying it toward the kitchen. It's returning to my grandmother's house upstate, Celia explained, watching Fritz's careful ministrations. But I wanted it to exit the way it came, through your door. If that isn't symbolic enough, Mr. Wolfe, I can embroider something. It is more than sufficient, Wolfe said. And if you don't think that was warmth, you have never watched him regard copper of quality. The pot served its purpose, first as the foundation for a perfect alibi, then as evidence of that alibi's integrity, and finally as a symbol of the precision required for both culinary excellence and institutional justice. Institutional aftermath. Gabriel Varelli arrived shortly after lunch, looking considerably more haggard than the confident administrator who had first entered our office. The events of the past week had aged him perceptibly, though his manner retained the careful courtesy of someone accustomed to managing institutional crises. The board is conducting a comprehensive review, he reported, settling wearily into his chair. New oversight protocols, enhanced security procedures, the complete restructuring of financial controls. Conrad Larrabee has personally apologized to Julian and authorized whatever compensation he deems appropriate. And the digital platform project? Suspended pending investigation. Nora Pell has been offered the interim COO position. She's already identified several other irregularities in Marjorie's systems. Varelli managed a wan smile. She says the servers will keep running, which is apparently all we can ask for at the moment. Wolfe's final judgment. After our visitors departed, Wolfe settled into the contemplative stillness that followed the successful conclusion of complex cases. The afternoon light slanted through the office windows, illuminating the orchid photographs and casting familiar shadows across the Persian rug. The brownstone had returned to its proper rhythm, the violation erased, the balance restored. Archie, he said after a period of comfortable silence, this case demonstrated the particular dangers of institutional corruption conducted by those who believe themselves to be serving higher purposes. Miss Lentz's intelligence made her conspiracy more dangerous than simple greed would have been. Because she convinced herself she was doing good, because she convinced herself that precision in means excused impurity in ends. He reached for his beer with deliberate satisfaction. Craft is not a cloak for corruption, Archie. It is an oath. Miss Lentz possessed the discipline to marshal systems and people, and the appetite to justify theft, but she lacked decency. She believed her vision entitled her to take what was not hers and break whom she must to have it. As evening approached and Fritz began preparations for dinner, the familiar sounds of our restored routine filled the brownstone. The case of the perfect alibi had been solved not through the alibi itself, but through the methodical exposure of those who had tried to weaponize precision against the innocent. Return to order. We sat to dinner at precisely 7:30. Fritz had prepared osso buco with a sauce that demonstrated his mastery of both classical technique and innovative presentation, his way of acknowledging the role that culinary precision had played in exposing institutional corruption. The meat was tender, the flavors perfectly balanced, a testament to the kind of honest craftsmanship that Marjorie Lentz had tried to counterfeit. Wolfe consumed each morsel with his usual focused intensity, his attention devoted entirely to the gastronomic experience. For him, a well-prepared meal was not merely sustenance, but a profound philosophical statement, a triumph of order and artistry over the chaos of human folly. "The violation of our sanctuary," he observed between courses, "has been answered with appropriate consequences. Miss Lentz discovered that some violations carry penalties beyond her calculations. And some spice jars," I added, "are not to be trifled with." He granted me the smallest of smiles. Fritz's kitchen is now properly arranged. The foundation's integrity is being restored, and Mr. Craig has been vindicated through the simple expedient of truth properly applied. The final word. Later, in the office with coffee and beer, Wolfe offered his ultimate reflection on the case. "Appetite, Archie, is not a vice. It is the engine of our days. But appetite without discipline is gluttony, and discipline without decency is tyranny. The recipe for justice, like the recipe for Duquette's reduction sauce, requires nothing more and nothing less than absolute precision, unwavering attention, and the courage to see the process through to its proper conclusion." The copper pot was gone, returned to its rightful place. The spice jars sat in their correct positions. The brownstone breathed with its accustomed quiet, and the world was once again properly ordered around the immovable certainty of Nero Wolfe's principles. "Well," I said, closing the case file with satisfaction, "I suppose some people just can't stand the heat, especially when they're trying to cook the books." "Pfui," Wolfe said, but his eyes held a glimmer of approval. "Take it to the pawn shop, Archie. Buy oregano." The game was over, justice had been served, and dinner had been, as always, precisely on time. In the end, that was what mattered most. The restoration of order, the triumph of truth, and the quiet satisfaction of a recipe followed to perfection.